It's been 7 years since the US gathered a coalition of the NATO willing to overthrow the government of Libya to bring freedom and democracy to the people there. So let's check in on how things are going in the North African nation.
The horrors of a modern-day slave trade.
Some immigrants and refugees in Libya are being traded and sold as slaves.
Ooh, that does not look good. So, how did slavery end up becoming a thing in Libya, a country that prior to 2011 had the highest literacy rate and standard of living in North Africa? Well, back in 2011, the US, UK, and France saw in the Arab Spring protests an opportunity to get rid of a regime they didn't like, under the guise of humanitarian intervention. Muammar Gaddafi was a brutal and authoritarian leader, they said. But that's not why the West didn't like him. Authoritarianism and dictatorship has never bothered the US as long as the dictator plays by America's rules. And Muammar Gaddafi didn't always play ball. He was a thorn in the side of Western imperialism and capitalism, directing Libya's vast oil revenues to education, literacy, electricity, infrastructure. That's why Libyans had the highest literacy rates and standard of living in Africa. And Gaddafi also supported movements that the US didn't like. So in 2011, Obama got his NATO partners together and imposed a no-fly zone on Libya to save the people from their mean authoritarian government, which we were told was violently cracking down on protesters. But the West had a weird way of liberating Libyans. They flooded Libya with weapons that ended up in the hands of extremists, some of whom were affiliated with Al-Qaeda. Weird how that keeps happening. And they launched a 7-month NATO bombing operation that destroyed most of the country's infrastructure and propelled the rebels to victory. NATO essentially collapsed the state, got rid of its leader, and handed the country over to competing extremist factions. So it's no surprise that Libya has since descended into lawless chaos that provided ISIS with a base in North Africa and resurrected slavery. After Gaddafi was sodomized with a bayonet by Western-backed rebels, some laughed.
We came, we saw, he died.
Others celebrated.
This is a momentous day in the history of Libya.
And the pundits promised things in Libya would get better.
There is no doubt in my mind whatsoever that men and women in Libya will live much better lives without Gaddafi.
That did not age well. Those who supported intervention said it had to happen to prevent a massacre by Gaddafi. But a year-long inquiry by the UK Parliament found that the NATO intervention was based on an array of lies, that the threat to civilians was extremely overstated, and that the rebels included significant Islamist elements. Oh, and the rebels, on top of being super extremists, were also super racist. They ethnically cleansed tens of thousands of black people from the majority Libyan town of Tawarja with NATO air cover. So again, no surprise that the rebels who took over Libya ended up buying and selling African migrants as slaves. Thanks, NATO! You gave Libya the freedom to sell slaves. But it can't be all bad, right? How about women? How are women in Libya doing these days?
There are also claims that women have been bought in Libya and forced to be sex slaves.
And it doesn't stop there. Women under the age of 60 in an area of eastern Libya under the control of a CIA-linked warlord are banned from traveling on their own without a male guardian. The only other places in the world where laws like that exist are Saudi Arabia and parts of Syria under the control of Salafi jihadist groups. Thanks, NATO! On the bright side, at least there's no blowback, right? Well, not exactly. Remember 22-year-old Salman Abedi, the guy who blew himself up last year in Manchester at an Ariana Grande concert? Well, turns out he learned how to make that bomb while fighting alongside jihadists to overthrow the regimes in Libya and Syria. You see, Salman Abedi's dad is a Libyan exile living in Manchester, which has a huge community of anti-Gaddafi exiles who joined the fight to topple him in 2011. In fact, British intelligence encouraged them to join by facilitating a rat line of anti-Gaddafi exiles to Libya to fight Gaddafi's forces. Unfortunately, the blowback won't end with Abedi. American wars of regime change in Iraq, Libya, and Syria have actively facilitated the growth of Salafi jihadist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda for use against Western adversaries. A policy like this will always come back to bite you in the ass. You'd think the West would have learned its lesson after arming the Mujahideen against the Soviets in the 1980s, which evolved into Al-Qaeda and eventually did 9/11. But no. So here's an idea. Stop overthrowing regimes you don't like. And stop arming jihadist proxies to do your dirty work. Who's with me?
Our goal should be regime change in Iran.
Oh, great. Here we go again.